was constructed in 1326. Now, has anybody here seen that really historically accurate film, Braveheart? We've seen that, haven't we? Now, there's a part in that film, ladies and gentlemen, where William Wallace, the Australian guy in the kill, okay, is storming the castle to attack the English soldiers. And as they go through the gate, the portcullis starts to drop down, and William Wallace stands underneath it, and he holds the portcullis up while his colleagues run through underneath to attack the English soldiers. Do you remember that bit? Yeah. 1.5 tons, ladies and gentlemen, it weighs. Okay? Never happened, okay? Now, in the stonework next to it, you'll see 3 holes, which are known as murder holes. Now, in times of peace, the occupants who lived in the Upper Bywood Tower would pour their waste down through those holes into handcarts below, ready to be thrown into the moat. But in times of war, all manner of nasty, horrible things have been poured through those holes onto attackers waiting below. Don't look so worried, we're not going to do that to you today. We tried to clear it with health and safety, they won't allow us to do it. What we're going to do, we're going to head that way now, ladies and gentlemen, through the archway, and I'll now take you to the outer wall of the Tower of London. Don't forget to look up, ladies and gents. Come through, you'll see the spikes of the portcullis and then the 3 murder holes. That's where we live. We live there now. Coming in, ladies and gents. Come in closer. Saves me having to shout. Okay then, ladies and gentlemen, we're now standing in the outer ward of the Tower of London, and we're in between those 2 defensive walls that I told you about earlier on. Now, the inner wall behind me here is 50 feet high. The outer wall behind you over there is 40 feet thick. Now, in between the 2, we've got Mint Street. So called because up until the year 1810, this is where all the coins of the realm were designed and minted. Now, in this house over here, ladies and gentlemen, this is number 2 Mint Street. Now, number 2 Mint Street used to be the home of the master of the Royal Mint. And in 1699, a very famous gentleman used to live in that house as master of the Mint. That was Sir Isaac Newton, that famous Englishman who invented gravity. It'd be a nightmare if he hadn't done that. Guided tours, you'll be floating around all over the place. Now, behind you there, ladies and gentlemen, over in the corner, we've got the Sully Port, or the Royal Entrance. Now, back in the day when London had little more than rough and uneven tracks, royalty preferred to travel by river. More in their royal barge up just the other side of that wall there. They would cross over a small drawbridge and they would make their entrance into the tower via that archway. Now, on the 29th of May 1533, King Henry VIII stood here, and he was awaiting the arrival of his second wife, Anne Boleyn, who was being brought to the tower to prepare for her coronation. And as Anne stepped into the archway over there, Henry, like a good husband, stepped forward. He embraced his new wife, he kissed her on both cheeks, and he promised to love her for the rest of her life. Yeah, 3 years, unfortunately. 3 years later, ladies and gentlemen, Anne was brought back to the tower via a different gateway and for very different reasons, but more about that story later on. Now, behind me here, ladies and gentlemen, we've got the Bell Tower, built in the reign of Richard I, or Richard the Lionheart. Now, it's called the Bell Tower because of the small belfry that sits on top. We'll get blown to death here at the moment. Now, inside that belfry is the oldest curfew bell in the City of London, and it dates from 1651, and it was rung as a warning. And when it was rung, the gates would be closed and the defences would be manned. But it was also rung 1 hour before every execution. Now, the Bell Tower is the oldest and the strongest of the 13 towers that make up the inner defensive wall, and it comprises of 2 chambers, one on top of the other. Now, it's always been used to house really important prisoners. One such prisoner was Sir Thomas More, the man for all seasons. Now, he'd been imprisoned here by Henry VIII for refusing to recognise Henry as head of the Church in England. Now, up until that point, he had been Lord Chancellor of England, one of the most important and powerful men in the country. But when Henry broke with the Roman Catholic Church, Sir Thomas found this totally unacceptable, as he himself was a devout Roman Catholic. So he resigned, and Henry had him imprisoned here. Now at first, he was treated quite well, and he had all the luxuries and comforts of home, and he even had his servants in here with him. But gradually, over a period of 15 months, Henry withdrew all these privileges, until all Sir Thomas had left were the clothes on his back. Now it was at this point that Henry conceded defeat, and vowed that if he couldn't break Sir Thomas's will, he would break his bones. So in 1535, he was taken out to Tower Hill, where he was publicly beheaded. Now also imprisoned in here with him in the upper chamber was his good friend John Fisher, Bishop of Rochester. Now he was a prisoner here for exactly the same reasons, but whilst here he was elevated to cardinal by the Roman Catholic Church. And legend has it that Henry vowed that before his cardinal's hat arrived from Rome, he would not have a head to wear it on. And like Sir Thomas, in 1535 he was taken out to Tower Hill, where he was publicly beheaded. Now both of these men were canonised as saints in 1935 by the Roman Catholic Church, and they now lie buried in the Chapel Royal of St Peter and Vincula here inside the walls of the tower. Now by far, ladies and gentlemen, the man who had the shortest stay here in the bell tower was a man by the name of James Scott, the Duke of Monmouth. Now he was the eldest of 14 illegitimate children fathered by King Charles II, and he'd been born whilst his father was in exile in Holland, trying to escape the clutches of a man by the name of Oliver Cromwell. Now when King Charles II died, he died without leaving an heir to the throne of England, and the throne was passed to his younger brother, James, Duke of York. Now Monmouth insisted that his mother had been married to Charles whilst they were in exile in Holland. Now if this were true, this would mean that James Scott, the Duke of Monmouth, was the legitimate heir to the throne of England. So in 1685, when James, Duke of York, was crowned King James II, Monmouth landed off the southern coast of England, and he raised an army of farmhands and labourers in what became known as the Pitchfork Rebellion. Now it ended in the defeat of Monmouth's army at the Battle of Sedgemoor in Somerset, where his army was totally defeated and routed. Monmouth was found hiding in a ditch a few days after the battle, and he was brought here to the Tower. In the space of 3 days, he was put on trial for high treason, and he was sentenced to death. Now on the day of his execution, his executioner was a giant of a man by the name of Jack Ketch, a full-time butcher, a part-time executioner, and some people say a professional drunk. Now on the day of the execution, Jack Ketch was so drunk he had to take 5 strokes of the axe to try to sever Monmouth's head. The first missed his neck completely and embedded itself deep into Monmouth's shoulder. Now by the time he had taken the 5th blow, Monmouth's head was still attached to his body. So in a fit of rage, Jack Ketch threw down his axe. He then pulled out his butcher's knife, and then he proceeded to cut off the remaining pieces of flesh and sinew that connected Monmouth's head to his body, before placing his head on a pike and then taking it down to London Bridge. Is everybody quite happy with this level of story? There's a few faces out there, that's all. It just gets bloodthirsty from now on, that's all. Now somebody then realised that the Duke of Monmouth was the son of a King of England, and up until that point he had never had his portrait painted. So one of the Beefeaters was dispatched from the Tower down to London Bridge to collect the head and bring it back here to the Tower. It was then sewn back onto the body by the Tower's surgeon. Now sadly, ladies and gentlemen, it was too late to save him. There is a joke there. I am told though that portrait does bear quite a macabre likeness. Now if you want to see that portrait for yourself, it now hangs in the National Portrait Gallery in Trafalgar Square. Go and make your own minds up, see it for yourself. Now talking of beheading, ladies and gentlemen, let's be heading off. Around the corner to Traitors Gate and the bloody Tower. I want to get worse than this. Okay then, ladies and gentlemen, now we're now standing beside the world famous, or should I say the infamous, Traitor's Gate, built in the reign of Edward I. Now it wasn't always called Traitor's Gate, it used to be called the Watergate. Anyone here from the States?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we had it first, okay, all right. Now the purpose of the Watergate is to allow the safe conduct of provisions and prisoners into the tower via the river, rather than using the unsafe roads around London, which were often inhabited by rogues and vagabonds who would steal those provisions and then often set the prisoners free. Now the term Traitor's Gate didn't come about until the Tudor period, because it was at that time that the tower was mainly used as a state prison. And during that period of history, 4 Queens of England were to walk up the steps here from Traitor's Gate. Queen Anne Boleyn, Queen Catherine Howard, Lady Jane Grey and the young Princess Elizabeth. Now of the 4 of them, 3 of them are still here, buried within the walls of the tower. They didn't get the chance to leave. Now above Traitor's Gate, ladies and gentlemen, we've got St Thomas's Tower, also built in the reign of Edward I. Now it's called St Thomas's Tower because it's named after St Thomas of Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury, who was murdered in Canterbury Cathedral on the orders of Henry II, Edward's grandfather. Now inside, ladies and gentlemen, is the medieval palace. So if you wish to visit the medieval palace after this tour is finished today, the entrance is just via the steps there to my left. You can walk through the medieval palace, across this bridge here, known as Salvin's Bridge, into the upper Wakefield Tower behind you there, which will then take you on to the southern and eastern ramparts, all of which are open for you to visit after this tour is finished today. Now behind you there, ladies and gents, we've got the infamous Bloody Tower. Boo, come on, boo. This is Panto, this. Now again, it wasn't always called the Bloody Tower, it used to be called the Garden Tower, but Shakespeare referred to it as the Tower of Blood in his play Richard III, because of the 2 alleged murders that took place inside. Now King Edward IV had just died, and he died leaving behind 2 young sons. The 12-year-old uncrowned Edward V and his younger 9-year-old brother Richard, Duke of York. Now because the young Edward was deemed too young to rule, they were put under the care and protection of their uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, who had the boys brought here to the tower for their own protection. But as soon as the boys were here, he had them declared illegitimate, and with the boys out of the way, funnily enough, this made him first in line for the throne of England, and he was soon crowned King Richard III. Now shortly after the coronation, the boys disappeared, and they were never seen alive again. Richard died fighting a few years later at the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485, and shortly after the battle, some men came forward and they actually admitted to murdering the boys whilst they slept in a bedchamber behind that window there. They said they had smothered the boys in their sleep, thrown their bodies down the stairs and covered them over with a pile of stones. The next morning a priest came and he took the bodies away and he buried them underneath the staircase inside the White Tower. Now there they lay undiscovered for 191 years until some workmen working on the staircase uncovered a box. Now they probably thought they'd found hidden treasure. You can imagine their dismay when they opened the box to find the bones of 2 young children. Now experts at the time immediately declared that these must be the bones of the 2 boy princes. So they were placed in an urn that was designed by Sir Christopher Wren, and they were then taken to Westminster Abbey, where they were interned in Innocents' Corner, in which Charles II had named after them. Now ladies and gentlemen, behind you over there, up high on the wall, you can see some windows that light up the back of the Queen's house, and I'll point out the Queen's house to you later on. Now the large window right at the very top, that lights up the council chamber, and it was in there that Guy Fawkes was interrogated after the Gunpowder Plot. Now for those of you who've never heard of the Gunpowder Plot, this was a failed attempt at blowing up King James I and all his ministers whilst they sat in Parliament in November 1605. Guy Fawkes was caught red-handed and he was brought here to the Tower for interrogation. Now at first he refused to give up the names of his co-conspirators, so on the orders of the King he was taken to the basement of the White Tower where he was put to the rack. Now for those of you who've never heard what the rack is, ladies and gentlemen, it's an ingenious device. It turns short people into tall people. Should be tried on some of them. There's a noise they're making. Now, unfortunately, though, having done so, it dislocates all the joints in the body. Now, unsurprisingly, after only a short period of interrogation on the rack, Guy Fawkes then gave up the names of his co-conspirators. But this didn't save him, because he was then taken to the place of his crime, Westminster Yard, where he was publicly hung, drawn, disemboweled, and then quartered. But every year, on November the 5th in this country, our children make effigies of Guy Fawkes. They put him on top of a bonfire, and then we set light to him. What a wonderful nation we are. We're great, aren't we? Right, ladies and gents, what we're going to do now, if you can make a gap for me there, please, so I can squeeze through. We're going to charge through the bloody Tower archway. I'll now take you to the very heart of the Tower of London. So let's go that way. Thanks very much, ladies and gents.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was like the read about it, it's so interesting, like real life.
Yeah.
I just think I can look at it
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. Actually, especially fun bit is to get they had that in that Tudor series. It's like a Duke of York or something. When they took the great they were able to
Okay then, ladies and gents, now we're now standing in the very heart of the Tower of London. Now everything you can see around you was built with this tower in mind. Now this is William the Conqueror's original fortress, the White Tower. Work started on the White Tower in the year 1078. And as you can see, due to French standards of workmanship, it's not finished yet. Is there anyone in the audience from France? Sorry, that's right. Now, it's only this side that's covered in scaffolding, ladies and gentlemen. We've got some conservation work going on here at the moment. You will be able to see the White Tower from the other side of the building as you walk round later on. Now, like I say, work started on the White Tower in the year 1078. It took 20 years to build. It was constructed by a man by the name of Gundulf of Bec, Bishop of Rochester. Now, its walls stand 92 feet high and they range in thickness from 15 feet thick at the bottom to 11 feet thick at the top. On each corner there is a tower. 3 of those towers are square and 1 on the far northeast corner is round, and it was in the round tower that the Royal Observatory was first established. Now on top of each of those towers you can see a lead turret, and on top of that lead turret there is a weather vane which displays the Royal Standard. Now the Royal Standard denotes that this is still very much a royal palace and fortress. Although it's no longer a royal residence, we mustn't lose sight of the fact that this building was the home to the kings and queens of England for its first 500 years. Now the White Tower comprises of 4 levels. The upper level was where the royal apartments used to be. The level below that was for knights and their ladies, but it also contained a banqueting hall, a council chamber and the Chapel Royal of St John the Evangelist, probably the finest example of a Norman chapel in this country. The level below that was for servants and retainers, and there is one more level below ground, which was mainly used for stores and provisions. But this did have a more sinister use, however, ladies and gentlemen, because this is where the dungeons and the torture chamber were located. We still torture people in there now, because we've converted it into a gift shop. Now the instruments of torture we once used down in there, ladies and gentlemen, can now be found just down to my left, underneath that blue lamp there in the lower Wakefield Tower. Okay. Now on the south side of the White Tower, over on the grass side there, there's a wooden staircase. That wooden staircase will lead you up inside to all the exhibits that are held within. Now halfway up that staircase on the right hand side there's a doorway. If you look inside that doorway you will see a brass plaque. That plaque marks the site of where the bones of the 2 boy princes were found. Now on the eastern side of the White Tower, okay, on the opposite side to where we're now standing, okay, you'll also find some cages. Now the cages are the night homes to our tower ravens. Now the reason we keep ravens here at the Tower of London is because of an old legend. Now, during the reign of King Charles II, the astrologers who worked inside the White Tower, they complained to King Charles about the noise and the mess that the wild ravens left behind, because up until that time, there were hundreds of ravens here at the tower, and they said that they were interfering with their experiments. So they asked King Charles if they could have the birds removed. Now, at first, King Charles agreed, but then someone reminded him of the legend: if the ravens ever leave the Tower of London, the White Tower will crumble to dust, and a great disaster will befall the nation. Now, King Charles II was a very superstitious king, and he'd already suffered two great disasters: the plague of 1665 and the Great Fire of London of 1666. So he decided not to take any chances, and he henceforth decreed that a raven master would be appointed from one of the Beefeaters, and he would be paid extra money each week to feed and look after the birds. But their numbers were to be reduced to 6, and 6 only. We've got 7 now. And the reason we've got 7, ladies and gentlemen, is because during a bombing raid in the Blitz in World War II, a bomb landed just over here and it destroyed what was left of the old guard room. And in the process, it injured 2 of our ravens so badly they had to be put down. This had reduced our numbers to 4, sent us into a major panic because it was quite early on in World War II, and the war at that stage was still going Hitler's way. So when we brought in the 2 ravens to take the place of the 2 we just lost, we brought in an extra one to sit on the bench just in case. Now, in the wild, for those of you who don't know, ravens live up until the age of about 15 years of age. Here at the tower, though, they normally exceed that by about another 5 years and live up to the age of about 20. And in fact, we had one bird in particular who went by the name of Jim Crow, who lived up until the ripe old age of 44. Okay, they do get a grand life here, ladies and gentlemen. They are well looked after by the Raven Master. They get fed the best cuts of meat from Smithfield Meat Market. They also get looked after by the vets from London Zoo, should anything happen to them illness-wise, which I suppose is the animal equivalent of a Harley Street specialist, really. Now, like I say, the cages are just there. They're the night cages, though we do have a couple in there at the moment that are waiting a check-up from the vets. The rest of the ravens are free to just wander around the tower at will, so you will see them doing their own thing. Now, in my opinion, ladies and gentlemen, the ravens are the true royalty of the tower now. Now, I've shown you, ladies and gentlemen, where some of our kings and queens of England once lived. Now I'm going to take you to a place where some of them died. So we're going to be going over there now to Tower Green and the private execution site. Cheers, mate. Coming in, ladies and gents. Coming a bit closer. Coming a bit closer. Come on round, ladies and gents. Come around this way. Before we start, we have a bit of consent here. Find out who I've got in the audience. Anyone here from Canada? That's one of our more smaller colonies, sir, isn't it? I do believe. What about our friends from the United States? Anyone from the States? Come on, I know you're here, guys. Just think, if you lot had paid all your taxes, all this history would still be yours, you know. For the sake of a cup of tea, what was that war all about? I don't know. What about anyone from down under? Australia, New Zealand? Good day? Time off for good behaviour, was it? You've come all this way to visit a prison, sir. I'm impressed. What about Europe? Anyone from Europe? Anyone from Europe? No one? Oh, where are you from, sir? Belgium, fantastic. Ooh. Welcome to England, sir. Anyone here from the United Kingdom? Is that not Europe?
Well, I was thinking about saying the
No, it's not, madam. We're an island. We're surrounded by water. Of course we're not. What about anyone else from the Far East, Middle East, anywhere like that? No?
India.
India, fantastic, madam. Welcome to it. Wherever you're from, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Tower of London today. On with the tour. Now, ladies and gents, we're now standing on Tower Green, which is our village green. Now, the only difference between this village green and any other village green in England is that we have a private execution site. Okay, now represented by this glass memorial, ladies and gents. Now, before I talk about the executions that took place here on Tower Green, I'd just like to point out some of the more important buildings that surround us. Now, along the cobblestone path here to my right, ladies and gentlemen, right down the very end, you'll find the entrance to the Bloody Tower. Now, inside there, ladies and gentlemen, you can find an exhibition about the 2 boy princes that were murdered there. You'll also find an exhibition about Sir Walter Raleigh, who was also a prisoner here at the Tower for 13 years. Over in the corner, down there, ladies and gentlemen, the large black and white building with the soldiers standing guard outside. Now, that's known as the Queen's House. Now it's called the Queen's House because it belongs to the Queen. It belongs to Queen Elizabeth II. Okay, it's a Tudor building, and it's the only Tudor building left standing in the City of London because all the rest were destroyed by the Great Fire in 1666. Now, it was built on the orders of King Henry VIII as a wedding present for Anne Boleyn. Unfortunately, though, Anne didn't get to live there because by the time it was finished, so was she. Now, it was then handed over to the officers of the Tower of London. It's always been used to house really important prisoners. Queen Catherine Howard, Henry VIII's fifth wife, was a prisoner there prior to her execution. And other important prisoners have included William Penn, founder of the state of Pennsylvania in the United States, and more recently, in 1941, Rudolf Hess, Hitler's deputy. But it's now the home to our resident governor and his family who live here at the Tower of London. Now, either side of it, ladies and gents, you can see some buildings with blue doors. Now, these are the homes to my fellow Yeoman Warder colleagues and their families who also live here at the Tower of London. But the building down on the far end down there, ladies and gents, is probably the most important building in the tower, because that's where I live. Commute to work's a nightmare. Behind me here, ladies and gentlemen, you see the large building with a big window at the centre. Look, you can see some of the ghosts staring outside of us now. Okay, now that's known as the Beecham Tower. Now, if you go upstairs in the Beecham Tower, ladies and gentlemen, you will find over 90 inscriptions, or medieval graffiti, if you like. Many of them dating back over 500 years to the Tudor period, because like I said earlier on, this was the time when the tower was mainly used as a state prison. Now, behind me, we've got two other houses with blue doors. The first one there is the home to our doctor, and the second one is the home to our chaplain. And on the left-hand side is the chaplain's office. Now, this is the Chapel Royal of St Peter ad Vincula. Now, we're going to be going in there shortly, ladies and gentlemen, to conclude our tour, and I will show you the final resting places of where some of those poor unfortunate souls who were to lose their lives outside on Tower Hill and those who lost their lives here on Tower Green were finally laid to rest. Now, behind you here, the big long building with the clock at the centre, and again the soldiers standing guard outside. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this is known as the Waterloo Block, or the Waterloo Barracks. Now, this was built on the site of a grand storehouse which burnt down in 1841. Now, it was constructed in 1845 originally as a barrack block for the soldiers' garrison here at the Tower of London, because right up until the 1960s, the Tower was still the home to a garrison of 1,000 British soldiers. The building, though, now, ladies and gentlemen, is used to house the crown jewels and the royal regalia. So if you wish to see the crown jewels after the tour's finished, ladies and gents, the entrance is directly underneath the clock. Now, back to where we're now standing here on Tower Green and our private execution site. Now, there were 6 official executions that took place here inside the tower, ladies and gentlemen. The first was that of Henry VIII's second wife, Anne Boleyn. Now, Anne was held here at the Tower for the final 18 days of her life prior to her execution in 1536. And Anne had been tried and condemned on various crimes such as adultery, witchcraft and incest. But so scared was she of the block and axe that she asked to be executed in the French manner with a two-handed sword. And we even brought the executioner across from Calais in France. Now, on the day of her execution, as Anne knelt down over there to say her final prayers, the executioner quietly and gently took the sword out from underneath a pile of straw where it had been hidden. And with one swift blow, he took her head clean off. Now, so swift and precise was the blow that he struck that it was said that as he lifted her head for all to see, her lips were still moving in prayer. 5 years later, it was to be the turn of Margaret Pole, Countess of Salisbury and an elderly aunt of King Henry VIII. Now, she had been convicted of no crime and had had no trial. The only problem was she had a son who was a cardinal, who was travelling through Europe preaching hatred against King Henry. And the only way Henry could get his own back on this troublesome priest was by executing his 80-year-old elderly mother. Following year, in 1542, the axe fell twice in the same day. The first victim was that of Henry VIII's fifth wife, Queen Catherine Howard, and the second, her lady-in-waiting, Jane, Viscountess of Rochford. Now, Queen Catherine's crime had been her adulterous liaisons with other men. The only problem was her handmaiden had known all about it, so she shared her mistress's fate alongside her and had failed to tell the king. Now, it was then to be 12 more years before the axe fell again, this time on the pretty neck of the young Lady Jane Grey, England's uncrowned queen of only 9 days. Now, her crime had just been the fact that she'd been a pawn caught up in a political power struggle. And from her place of confinement in number 5 Tower Green over there, she would see her husband, Lord Guildford Dudley, being taken from the Beecham Tower out to his execution on Tower Hill. Shortly afterwards, she would see his lifeless corpse be brought back into the tower for burial inside the Chapel Royal. And if that wasn't traumatic enough for this young 16-year-old girl, she could also see and hear the men constructing her own scaffold site here on Tower Green for her execution later that day. Now, the last official execution to take place inside the tower wasn't a lady this time it was a man by the name of Robert Devereux, the 2nd Earl of Essex. Now, he'd been a great favourite of Queen Elizabeth I, but he'd been caught up on the periphery of a plot against her life, and he'd been tried and condemned to death. But because the Queen liked him so much, she allowed him the dignity of a private execution here inside on Tower Green. Told you we were lovely people. Now, ladies and gents, I think that's enough for torture and execution for one day. What we're going to do now, we're going to go inside the Chapel Royal. Now, before we go in there, ladies and gents, there are a few rules and regulations that you do need to be aware of. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, I must remind you that the Chapel Royal is still a Christian place of worship. So, gentlemen, if your religion permits you, please do as I do when entering the chapel and remove your headdress. Ladies, you keep your heads covered, you're fine. Now, also, there's to be no smoking, eating or drinking inside the church, and photography, sound recording and video filming is not permitted under Crown copyright law. So if you do take a photograph inside the church, ladies and gents, you're committing treason. You're going to end up there, okay? Please, please don't do it. Now, also, if you have one of those instruments of the devil, the mobile phone or cell phone, can I please ask you to make sure that's switched off now before entering the church? If you're waiting for an important call, ladies and gentlemen, please, please switch it to silent or vibrate. Better still, throw it in the River Thames where it belongs. Now, if there's anyone in the audience under the age of 21 years of age, trust me on this one, kids, you switch that mobile phone off, your heart's not going to stop beating. You're going to be fine, all right? You'll stay with us. Now, lastly, as we go into the church, there is a small step. It's about that high. Now, it's been there for hundreds of years. The trouble is, it has the habit of jumping up and tripping the unwary visitor. So please, please be careful as you make your way into the church. Now, ladies, fear not. Chivalry here at the tower is not dead. I'm going to be waiting just inside that doorway there, and should any of you ladies trip and fall, I will be there to catch you in these old soldiers' arms of mine. Gentlemen, if any of you lot trip and fall, it really hurts. See you way down to my colleague Paul, he'll let you in, and I'll see you inside.